Okay, there we go. Welcome, Deborah. Great to have you back.
Great, thanks. And I am pleased to be here. One request on my side is that if you are able to turn on your camera, I do appreciate it because I really hate talking to black boxes. And you can please do say who you are in chat, because to me, this is a very interesting audience. You know, I did work in state government for my first 5 years out of engineering school for the state of Texas Air Pollution Agency. And I was also active at the local level. I was president of the League of Women Voters in Corpus Christi, Texas, for a couple of years, and I was on their state board of directors. Okay. And so I mentioned this because even though a lot of my more recent experience is at the national level, I did start basically in state and local government. And so I really understand sort of the kind of opportunities and challenges that it presents. So the first thing I'm going to do is one thing I'm really sort of beginning to use every day are these various AI tools, these large language models. And so I'm going to have some exercises in here. And so I would like for you to pick one of these tools to use during the exercise. Now, I emphasize there's no grading or anything related to this, but part of what I have learned is, of course, these technologies have a lot of ups and downs, but from my perspective, I do think it makes me a better policy analyst. And, I'm not just an academic, I'm a real world policy analyst. That's what I do most of the time. And I have found that it definitely does improve the sort of efficiency, in other words, how much time I spend, the effectiveness, and also the equity, because it'll bring up things that I might not have thought of otherwise, like say maybe a particular stakeholder group or things like that. Like I was doing something on, paper bags, right? And I didn't really paper versus plastic, and as an exercise, and I didn't think, I never really thought about sort of the grocer's perspective on this, right? Though it's kind of an obvious one, but it's hard to think of all the different stakeholders and so forth that are involved. So as I'm going to go through this introductory material, please do, sign up for one of those models. They're so amazingly fast that, we should be able to complete these exercises in the time that we have. And it's a good chance, I find, for many of these workshops that I do, that people can actually sort of play around with them and sort of see what they do. So with that, as mentioned, this is part of 3 workshops. So this workshop on understanding program value essentials is just going to give you an overview. And then we did kind of start running out of time as I got more in depth. So the next one is going to, focus on stakeholder community engagement, which is a very important part of program evaluation, and logic models and indicators. So even though you and for all of these, I'm still going to kind of show you how to use these tools, what prompts you can use to enhance the quality of your analysis. So we're going to first talk about how the program evaluation empowers state level governance, talking about the 6 steps in program evaluation, the differences between inputs, outputs, and outcomes, sources of data and data collection, the importance of stakeholder engagement, methods to communicate the results, and ethical considerations. So the first thing is think about first, how does program evaluation empower state and local government employees? So this, I sort of picked this headline out. This is from Chicago in April, and it's talking about this after-school program. So there was some, like I said, I'm based in Pittsburgh. I'm not based in Chicago, but there seemed to be this after-school program, and there was some mix-up at the state level, and there's some concern about these after-school programs. Now, my daughter, I know, participated in many of these. Probably many of you maybe participated in themselves, or your kids have, or your nieces or nephews, or whatever it might be. So the question is, when something like this happens, this is often a situation where you need to show evidence that it is worthwhile to keep it afloat, because there's certainly going to be somebody out there who says, hey, that kid, they should have an after school job instead, or, oh no, kids should be free and they should play, and all these other kinds of things, whatever it is. There's always somebody who's going to disagree with you. So to do that, you need data and you need analysis. You can't these days just say, hey, here's all the inputs to the program and here's the output, and then a miracle occurs, and miraculously, this is a wonderful program. You always need to have data and analysis to support your program. It might be so that the program continues. It might be so it expands. There's lots of different reasons, why you might need to do a program evaluation. But the one thing you can't really get by without these days is data and assessment. So in this case, this is interesting. There's like a nonprofit in Chicago that did analysis on their after school programs. So the NGO is called After School Matters. And the reason I like this collection, as we're kind of going to go through it, is because it's talking about outcomes. It's talking about the impact of the program. It's not talking just about how many kids are in the program. Like it's not talking about how much funding we have. That would be the input. It's not talking about the outputs, which is how many kids are in the program, but it's talking about outcomes. What impact these after school programs in Chicago have on their community. So the first one is, again, these stakeholders here, one of them being teens, is that 9 in 10 teens report having fun, feeling challenged and satisfied. So they have high engagement. They have 80% have a sense of belonging. 90% feel that they develop skills and confidence in their abilities. 80% feel safe. And on this last one, 80% have, a more of a sense of hope about the future. Now, this preparation for the future, is one that policymakers, are more really likely to look at. Like, why? This is all nice and fuzzy wuzzy, but why is it that we, as taxpayers, why should we invest in these programs? And the first is because the teens are twice more likely than their peers to graduate from high school, and 1.5 times more likely to enroll in college, and 90%, 6% of these teens report having plans after graduation. And this is something that people care about because we want, our kids to grow up and be part of our communities, be part of our economic system and our social system. And these are like examples of like justification for the program. And these were cited in that was an editorial that I showed you from the newspaper. Okay, so I just am checking here to kind of see if we have any questions, but no, I see lots of different interesting people from all over the place. So this is the first prompt that I want you to put into one of these models. And what I want to do is to make it specific to like your situation, because in just looking through the list of participants, you guys are all over the place in all sorts of different areas of program and policy and so forth. So type in this prompt, which is identify 3 real-world examples of how program evaluation helps state and local government professionals in, and you can pick any topic. It could be, like I said, energy, environment, homelessness, education. You can be specific for your department, whatever it might be, and then add to that and just put in your like a state. If you work at the state level, or a city, if you work at that level. Or if you don't work at the state or city level, just put your hometown or wherever it is you're living now, and 3 sentences. Okay, so we're going to stop and do that. And then what I want you to do is just pick one of those things and then just copy them into chat. Thank you, Hannah, for typing that in. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you, Katie. And Jack. Mhm. Okay, lots of interesting examples here. I like this one here that Sean has of the Clipper card, because I can really see that that would be something that somebody would want to evaluate, having lived in DC for so many years. Okay. So great. So, continue to, put these, put whatever it is that you get into chat. And the other thing I want to sort of also mention about using these models, it's one thing I've learned, and I have verified this with people who are like not programmers, who are like AI tool kind of experts. It's really important that you kind of see the AI, right? So, you want it to kind of get into your frame of thinking. So you always want to start out with a general question like this. So program evaluation is a pretty common concept, so that's like not too bad. But in this case, what we want to get it into is also kind of that state and local and state city time sort of thinking, right? Because as we go further into this, then we're going to be able to use more and more shortcuts, because we're kind of building a story going from one prompt to the next prompt. So here I did this for Pittsburgh, which is again where I live, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And and I picked like these, identify 3 world examples, and I got 3 things: an energy policy, because I do a lot of work in energy policy, which is energy efficiency programs, which is a big deal here in Pittsburgh. So I know that that is like an accurate thing. Renewable energy adoption, that's another big thing here, where which people don't often think about Pittsburgh as being renewable energy, but there's a lot of rooftop solar things. And then electric vehicle infrastructure development. Amazingly, my local grocery store, which is only a couple miles from me, now has about 10 Tesla charging stations. And I talked to my sister in Texas, and she says, yeah, the same thing is here at HEB, which is the version of Giant Eagle in Texas. And so that all sort of makes sense to me. And so that's kind of another thing you want to think about these air models. Does it make sense to you, like what's in here? And given I do know about quite a bit about energy policy in this region, I think this is a pretty good list. Okay, so why do we do program evaluation? So the first is accountability. So sometimes it's required by funding organizations as a condition. So we were talking about that, whatever it was, that Metro card or whatever it was that was in that one city or state. That might have been part of, like, when the city council or the state government would ever put it in, they might say, okay, we want to see how well this is working after a year. And that aspect is not uncommon at all. I do a lot of work in West Virginia, and we get funding from foundations, and they also will ask for, like, we're going to know whether or not this program works in like a year or 2 years. We just actually got a couple of different grants, and every single one asks that question. Sometimes we want to make the case for more funding, so we have maybe right now the program is serving 100 people, but now that people know about it, now 500 people want to participate, right? And then sometimes we just want to, just for like maybe even our own purposes, try to figure out how to make it more efficient, to basically to get the best bang for the buck, how to make it more effective in achieving its societal goals, and how it can be fair. Maybe there's a certain population which is, where their need is not being as well served as other populations. And equity these days, I teach actually a whole class on equity analysis, is one of the big issues today, primarily because the Biden administration has issued a lot of executive orders. And so now it's a requirement of some of these state grants that be part of what they do is an equity analysis and a community engagement plan. So when you're looking at this, we're talking about these three things here: effectiveness, efficiency, and equity I was just talking about, and all these other things as well, which is more like operational, like the indicators of need, implementation, delivery, improvements in the program. So this is what we want to look at. We want to look at the past, we want to look at the present, like have we improved from the past, and how can we continue to improve into the future? So sometimes evaluations are internal, so you might just do a program on your own to kind of see how well it's working. Then other times it's external for an outside party. It could be government, it could be a funding organization. The way we do this is through logic models, which is going to be the topic of our next thing, and also looking usually a mix of qualitative and quantitative data, which is called mixed methods. Okay, so there are 6 steps in program evaluation. This is from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. I like it because it's very easy to kind of use and understand. There's also a lot of guidance out there on it if you really want to get in depth into a particular area. So these first 3 steps you can do in any order, kind of depending on where you're at. But the first is engage stakeholders, describe the program, then you focus the evaluation design, and that is based on stakeholders and what information is that they're looking for. You then gather evidence, you justify your conclusions, and then you ensure use and share lessons. And in program evaluation, it is really a big circle because you're constantly looking to try to figure out how to improve the program. So in the middle here are these standards. And the standards are, these are like international program evaluation standards. There's like a big giant book just on this topic that says that when you're doing a program evaluation, you need to think about these 4 aspects. So it's utility, which is how useful it is, feasibility, which I think is really super important in program evaluation, because, program evaluation is something that can cost a little or can cost a heck of a lot. And you need to make sure that your program evaluation design fits the needs of the program, the staff you have available. You can't do a Cadillac program evaluation for every program out there. It's just not worth it. Just like not possible. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do any, but it means that you really need to focus it and think about it ahead of time as to what it is you're going to do. And these steps, particularly the stakeholder engagement, will help with that. Then you have propriety, which is basically saying, hey, let's not do anything mean and nasty. That's the way I look at it. And then accuracy. You want to make sure that it is an assessment that you can believe in and that others will believe in. And I think that all makes sense. Okay, so first, how do you engage stakeholders? Now, this will be a bigger topic that is in one of our future webinars. But what I want to get across here with this cartoon is that some people are like afraid to talk to stakeholders. I work with a lot of scientists, engineers, a lot of students at all different levels, and getting them to talk to real people can be really, really hard. I mean, really hard. Like right now, that's exactly what I'm doing. I have somebody who's working on a project which is actually funded by the Build Back Better program, and we're doing something, something called regulatory sandboxes, and I need them to talk to like 4 people: the people who run the 2 regulatory sandboxes in West Virginia, and one that's in and somebody else who's based in Boston, and somebody and one in Arizona, where we're kind of looking at the example. And I'm having a really hard time convincing the student. And he's like a master's student. Well, actually, sorry, that he's a law student about to graduate. He already has a job offer, right? And I'm still having a hard time getting him to talk to stakeholders. So I know it is a challenge to talk to real people, but sometimes you really do have to talk to real people. And so please don't be like this person in the corner there. Okay, so who are stakeholders? So stakeholders is looking at the people who are implementing the program. So it's not just the people that are being served, but the people who implement the program also have ideas about how the program could run better and so forth. So we have the program director, managers, staff, volunteers, consultants. Then we have the decision makers, so the policymakers, agency leadership, the funders, the people who are being served by the program, not just even the clients themselves, but just like in that after school program, we're talking about the family members, might be neighborhood organizations, non-governmental organizations, which is like that one I was talking about, after school programs, they're a stakeholder. And then you have all these different partners, and here, the thing I want to get out of this primarily is make sure to actually talk to the skeptics and the opponents of the program, because, they're just going to cause you problems at the end if you don't collect the data, whatever data it is that you're looking for. So you want to talk to them early in the process, say, well, why don't, what are your concerns about this after school program? What is it that you are worried about, or things like that. And that way you can incorporate that into your data collection. So maybe ask the kids, okay, well, why aren't you doing an after school job? And they might say, well, my neighborhood is not safe to get an after school job, or whatever it might be. Okay, so here is our next sort of prompt. And I just gave the example here, which is identify 10 real world examples of stakeholders in, and this is whatever your topic is. I picked out of the 3 that I had, renewable energy adoption, and then I talked about my city and state, again, Pittsburgh. So, can everybody take a bit of time and do that, and then just put in, like an example of maybe a stakeholder that surprised you that you didn't expect.
And just to clarify for everyone, Deborah, would you like people to use ChatGPT or Bard, or come up with them themselves?
The answer is you can do any. My favorite is still ChatGPT. But sometimes for one reason, like I find Bard too often refuses to give me the answer. It just says, oh, I'm just a little language model. I can't do that. That irritates me because it's like not that hard of a question. But the advantage of Bard is that it, you can sometimes ask it for links. So that seems to go in and out. I will say that ChatGPT, just in something I was working on yesterday on a totally different topic, did give me citations. And so personally, all these examples are from ChatGPT because I find it's more conversational. But you could use any of them, and and sometimes I will say frequently I use all 3: ChatGPT, Bard, and as I understand it, by the way, the reason I've now started to use Claude, which I just heard about a few weeks ago, is I think that company has been bought by Amazon, who's also getting into the business. And sometimes I like Claude better than the other examples.
Thank you. And I just put in a link for folks if they want to register. It's very easy and it's free.
Yeah, this is all free stuff. Every once in a while, sorry. Everybody, I was looking up something to answer somebody's question. I do have the paid version of ChatGPT, but that's just because I use it an awful lot. So the question I was asking is, somebody asked me to explain a bit more what propriety standards are. And so I thought I'd look up the official definition, which is ensuring that the evaluation will be conducted legally, ethically, and with due regard for the welfare of those involved in the evaluation, as well as those affected by its results. So as an example, let's just say that you were doing a study that was about violence in the home against women. You obviously don't want to put those women at risk when you're evaluating how good your program is. Or, maybe it's for a shelter for women who are being abused, right? And you want to make sure that you're protecting them as part of that study. So I hope that I just saw that question flash by. So I hope that answered the question for whatever it is. Okay, so yes, thank you. I think that right now I only have one example of some stakeholders. So hopefully I can get some others in here before we move on. I think that, Jack, this is a good example. You're looking at transit, but it's also looking at the providers and the NGOs and things like that. So I think that's sort of a good example. The other thing I'd like to do is I like to predict the answer before I ask ChatGPT. And I also like to go, like I intentionally pick 10, because usually I might pick the first couple as obvious ones, but as it gets further down, it's more likely the people that I might not remember, or it might be an organization I don't know about, like this Pennsylvania Solar Center. I don't know what that is. Okay, I'm going to continue on, but please go ahead and, oh, thank you, Lauren, for putting some examples in there. Oops, okay. So the other thing when we're doing stakeholder analysis is that it's important to include the people who are not served by the program. So this goes back to that after-school program. I thought this was an interesting. So this says that of 400,000 youth in Illinois, 18 participate in after-school programs, 24% are in after-school programs in high poverty areas, and 41% would participate if one was available to them, right? So you might remember that they did this activity asking the teens, like, why is this really good for you, and things like that, and they can say these things. But if I was doing this study, I would also ask these people, the 41% who would participate, if one was available to them, what do you do since you can't participate in an after-school program? Is it something worthwhile, or you just sit there and, I don't know, play video games all day, or do you get a job, or what is it that you do? So I thought this was a good example of the importance of including potential clients who are not served, because what you want to do, obviously, is to increase the funding or increase the number of after-school programs so you can serve those youth. But you need to generally prove that you need it ahead of time, that there's somebody out there who wants to use it. Okay, so the second is describing the program. And lots of times there's people who says, I trust my project is too complex for logic and evidence. And particularly in my world, the science and technology world, people just say, oh, of course it's worthwhile. We don't see any reason why we have to justify our existence as scientists, engineers, our research programs, or whatever it might be. But what I tell them is that, the funding for research and development and all these things only occurred from the federal government in substantive numbers after World War II. So we had the majority of the United States, the history of the United States, the federal agencies did not fund R&D. And it's certainly something that could be taken away. And we've definitely seen cases, real world cases, where some particular member of Congress doesn't like a particular area of research, like say stem cell research, and they want to not use federal funding for that research. So I think it's really important to say not say something like, oh, it's obvious why this program or that program is important, because there's always going to be somebody who is against whatever program it is. And I think probably all of you who work in state and local governments probably know that already. So like I said, we're going to have another thing entirely on logic models, but I like this particular graphic, which actually comes from the Office of Personnel Management at the federal level, because it kind of shows how we're supposed to think about it. So the first part of logic model says we use these resources. Those are the inputs. So that's the money, that's the staff. It might be the equipment, it might be the building, infrastructure, all these different things. And then we're using those resources for these activities. So it can be anything. It can be research, it can be after school programs, it could be, vaccinations. I just got 4 vaccinations. Oh, sorry, in the past week or so. Yeah. And so that's, so let's just use vaccination. We're producing these outputs. So the outputs might be, say, how many kids are in the after school program, how many people get vaccinations. And then we want to do this so people, sort of change their ways. In other words, so that we don't get sick, or that we're in after school program so we don't get into trouble, that we don't use drugs or, whatever bad things that are out there. In a say an employment program, we want it to be so they can get jobs. And that is really what the outcomes are, right? We want to have, we don't want to get sick. We don't want to, have people be so sick that they can't take care of their kids, that they aren't able to go to work, all those different things. And that leads to these results. And those results, these long-term outcomes, are a better society, a better economy, better health, all those kind of big picture kinds of issues. Okay, so this is our sort of next prompt here, where I said identify 3 real-world outputs and outcomes for renewable energy adoption in Pittsburgh. You might even be able to say identify 3 world outputs and outcomes for the above to make it even shorter. And part of the reason I want you to do this is so you can see the difference between outputs and outcomes. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that and look at your chat in the meantime. Okay, yeah. So Beatrice says, in other words, working backwards. And yes, indeed, it is. You can also work backwards on these models. You can go one way or the other way. It really kind of depends on where you are in the process. Now, I tend to go forward if it is an existing program, because sort of I know those answers. And I tend to go backwards if it is a new program, right? So somebody just said, hey, we're going to give, $10 million to put renewable panels on every roof in Pittsburgh, right? So then I know what the result is that the policymaker wants. And then I go backwards to figure out what activities and things like that it is that I should do. Now, sort of another kind of way to think about this. So I was doing actually some working with NIH, part of NIH on a project, and focusing on logic models. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to put more equity into their program. And so what I had them do is I had them do a logic model for the existing program, right? And then and so they had that as a base case. And then for the results, what I did is they had to just develop a new strategic plan. This is just a section of NIH. They had a new strategic plan, and so I had them put the outcomes that they had agreed upon the strategic plan, and then I had them go backwards to figure out what activities they needed to add to get those outcomes, those equity outcomes. And so the beauty of the logic models is that you can use them in all sorts of different ways, and they're very flexible, but indeed you can go forwards, backwards, all sorts of different ways. So I don't show it on this thing, but we have a whole thing on logic models coming up. So tune in for more action in logic models. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Great. So I'm starting to see some answers here. Great. Okay. So I'm going to go over this example as you guys are finishing up. So the outputs here, and this is my renewable energy example here, are solar installations, EV charging stations, green building certifications. Okay. So these are things that we can measure in terms of like numbers, like how many of this, how many solar installations, how many charging stations, how many green building certifications. But let's just take the EV charging stations as an example. There's no good having those 10 Tesla electric charging stations at my local grocery store unless people use them, right? And I will say, amazingly, I think I was very skeptical on this, but I drive by there like once a week or something like that, and I looked, and amazingly there was like 3 or 4 being used. So they are being used by somebody, and I thought that was rather interesting. Okay, so outcomes, on the other hand, are what we as a society want, right? So why are we putting those renewable energy things in the first place, right? Because we want to reduce carbon emissions. We want to create jobs. There is one of the most interesting companies that's here in Pittsburgh is a vertical wind turbine. And the nice thing about vertical wind turbines is you can put them next to like a building or something, right? As opposed to the big giant ones that you see, up on mountains and so forth. Another thing we care about is energy security, right? So more and more, and we found this particularly during the pandemic and with the war in Ukraine, things like that, we want to be able to rely on our own sources of energy. We don't necessarily want to go beyond the United States, and even better, beyond our own community. So outputs are, the things that what it is that we're providing, the quantity of what we're providing, right? But outcomes, okay, are what we as a society want. We don't want those electric vehicle charging stations just because, right? We want it for those reasons. Okay, so the
Deborah,
next,
just a quick clarifying question from Anna, who's asking, are logic models always linear?
I would say the answer to that is no. There can be. I'm trying to think of an example, but I will work on that for the thing on logic models. But I'm pretty sure that I have seen some more like circular logic models or concentric circles or things like that. So kind of more from a systems analysis perspective. I think the most common one, though, like I've never seen one that you have to, that you need to provide as part of some analysis for a funding organization that's not linear. But I believe I've seen some in other scenarios where organizations are trying to explain their program where they're not linear. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions?
There's one from Kimberly who's asking, can outcomes also be quantified? For example, a percentage increase in job creation.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. In fact, that's what you do want to measure your outcomes as well as your outputs. Sometimes, and that's why you'll see sometimes short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. And again, we'll talk about that in the next thing. So, so let's just take our electric vehicle charging station as an example. So maybe my short-term outcome is, okay, so there's, so there's more vehicle charging stations. And so then I want to figure out, okay, well, how many more people are buying electric vehicles because now they have access to a charging station, which is, I think, a free charging station as far as I know, right? And then I can use that information, like the switch, from a gasoline vehicle to an electric vehicle to figure out how much carbon is reduced. And what I want to see is on a longitudinal basis, the speed with which those carbon emissions are reduced. And I might even compare it to another option. Like another option might be, say, a hybrid car, right? Things like that. Any other questions while we're on this topic?
Yes, we'll take one more from Julia, who's asking, could logic models loop? You go through the model, evaluate, and then go back.
Yeah, so basically logic models are evergreen models, right? You should constantly adding to them, changing to them, so forth. So an example I was giving at NIH. So they have their current logic model, but now they're adding, then but they've now decided they need more activities to enhance the equity of their program, right? So that's a new program goal. So that means, so then they're going to go back and they're going to continue to enhance it and come up with new activities and programs, maybe new money. Maybe they're going to have to move money around. So maybe they're going to have to drop one of their existing programs so they can fund the program that's going to improve equity. But maybe that means they're going to have to drop a program that, I don't know, just funds old white people or something. And that's part of the challenge. They've actually, just as an illustration of this, there's been a big discussion at NIH about funding of postdocs on their campus, right? That they're not paid enough. And so the postdocs have been campaigning for this with the NIH leadership. And the NIH, so when I happen to be just talking to a group of postdocs this summer. And I said, okay, well, they got two options. One is to reduce the number of postdocs so they can increase the salaries of the postdocs coming in. Right. So say they're making $50,000 and there's 100 of them, they can reduce it to 90 and pay each of those postdocs, I don't know, 5,000 more. Right? Or they can take the money from other programs to fund more postdocs. And guess what NIH decided to do? Yeah. Decrease the number of postdocs. Okay. That's obviously not something that was going to make the postdocs particularly happy because that's less opportunities for them. But they decided that versus something else. And that's, in a logic model, you can really sort of see those things happen. By doing one thing, and you're sort of helping, you're hurting somebody else. Because as I'm sure all of you know, dollars are generally a zero-sum game. If you increase money for one thing, something else is going to drop out. You're lucky if you get it, any sort of increase from year to year. Like in the federal government, it's like usually a couple of percent if you're lucky.
Thanks, Deborah. Fawn's asking what you see as the difference between a logic model and a theory of change.
A logic model is just meant to explain a theory of change, right? So you can, you can say here, like your theory of change should be based on evidence, right? It's not always based on evidence, but it should be based on evidence. And, so for the after school program, there's going to be the theory of change is going to be something like, if we provide after school programs for kids and for teens in disadvantaged communities with high crime rates, the crime rate will decrease. That's a theory of change, right? But the logic model gives a lot more explicitity to that theory of change, because you need to figure out like, well, how many after school programs and how much should we fund them and at what schools, there's, how many high schools are in this community and Is it better to do it at the high school? Or is it better to do it in the center? All these different things. So there's many, many decisions you have to make as you're implementing that theory of change. And then you're going to have to measure it to see if it's working or not working. But the concept of, after school programs, decreasing crime rates, that should really come from your academic literature, which hopefully will have shown, have assessed the effectiveness of this particular mechanism. So you have that theory of change.
Thanks, Deborah.
Okay, anything else?
Not for now.
Okay, great. Well, let's continue on. Let's see here. Okay, so in the third step, what you want to do is you want to sort of focus the evaluation design. So you're thinking about like exactly what what data it is that you're trying to collect. Oops, sorry. Who is going to want to use the results? How will they apply the information? What questions should it answer? How are we going to collect the data? And then how how are we going to implement it within the available resources that we have? So this data collection phase, this, as I sort of mentioned earlier, you really need to think about how much resources you have. By that I mean sort of people and time, and the availability to do quantitative analysis of some kind, or another. When I was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and Carnegie Mellon is like well known for its many project classes, and a lot of the project classes that we did with the students were basically to do this activity. And so we would always be looking for clients and things like that. Like one of my students worked on something about natural gas vehicles in Pittsburgh. It turns out there's all sorts. It's a really much more complicated subject than, oh, let's just switch to natural gas for our buses, which may, these things get a lot harder than you might get. And so you want to do that data collection so you can sort of figure out, what it is that you can really measure and use and collect. So one thing that we really want to look at is looking at some of these indicators, right? So the purpose of an indicator is to sort of see, are we on the right track? Most of the time, we're using these to measure outputs and outcomes, going back to that earlier question. So in this case, again, this is your new chat GPT or whatever prompt. And I just randomly picked 5, for this, but you might, you can pick as many as you want. Like we're looking at the capacity of renewable energy installed, right? So that would be the output, right? Then we're looking at the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That would be the outcome. And the energy cost savings would also be an outcome, because people don't really, like if you ask the average person on the street, they really don't care how much renewable energy is installed. They just care that the environment's getting better and that they're saving money. Then here's a couple others, looking at job creation, right? So that is for a lot in the energy environmental world, a lot is focused on, okay, we need to, like particularly in my neck of the woods, in Southwest Pennsylvania and in West Virginia, where we have a lot of people who've lost jobs in the coal sector or in coal communities. And as part of sort of this just transition, we want to be able to create jobs in other sectors that these people can go to. And then community engagement and participation. And that goes back to what I was talking about, is like, you can have those electric vehicle charging stations, but will people go to them? My favorite example is there's something in my house that instantly saves energy, yet I cannot get my daughter to use it. Anybody have any idea what that might be? It is a light switch. So it's not just the technology. Sometimes we have the technology, but I still can't get my daughter, who is now like about 25, to turn off the lights in the house. Very, very, very frustrating, but this is life. So these are all indicators that we should have. And so again, I think sometimes people have a hard time thinking about indicators. And so I think this is really where something like ChatGPT can really kind of give you some ideas as to what it is that you can do. And then you can look to see, is it an existing source of information or not? So the next step is gathering credible evidence. And so, like I said, you want to, so let's just take our electric vehicle charging station example. Okay. So I don't know if anybody's monitoring whether or not those stations are used or not. All right. But I hope that somebody is, maybe they can do that just by some sort of digital tracking of the use of the charging stations, how much people are using them. And not just by how much power, but by how many times, and maybe how many different users, or maybe while they're standing there waiting for the vehicle to recharge, maybe you could ask them some questions like, do you why are you using the station? Is it because you don't have one at home? Did it encourage you to buy a vehicle? All these different things. So you're going to want to think about that information. Like, what is it going to measure? What are going to be the sources, of that? Like I've talked about with people, like answering questions, observations, hopefully through some sort of digital monitoring thing. Is it trustworthy? How much is enough? How much is sufficient? And how are you going to actually do it? Right? There's a lot of logistics that are involved in data collection. I'm working on now this morning, actually, that was on carbon dioxide removal stuff. And, I'm trying to figure, we were trying to figure out today how many case studies do we need so that it's credible data. Right. And so we came up with a number, but, we have like, we could do hundreds, but that's well beyond what this project can afford. So how many do we actually need to do? In what sectors, what kinds of, this is case natural CDR, do we need to do them in? What are the criteria we should use for selection? It's taken us, like a couple of weeks just to figure out this aspect of it. Oops, so, hold it. I went backwards, didn't I? No, hold on. Yeah. Okay, so this is again your prompt that you would be saying is so you're going to tell ChatGPT, how would you gather evidence like for these indicators? And so at this point in the ChatGPT world, you've given it a story, sort of a line of thinking, right? So you can say something like, how would you gather evidence for the above? And then it can give you ideas as to how you can do it. So in this case, for these indicators that we developed in the previous section, we're looking at document analysis, site visits for capacity of renewable energy installed. Then for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we can look at energy production data, and we can compare it from the baseline. That's something I really want to emphasize, by the way, is it's so important to have a baseline. So you don't ever want to institute a new program without first gathering data on the baseline, because otherwise, how can you show that theory of change? How can you show things have gotten better? And so many times when I work with groups, that is the biggest mistakes they make. All of a sudden, they want to know, like, how well are we doing in equity? Well, they can't tell you if anything is better from now versus 5, 10, 15 years ago, because they don't have any data, because they never measured it at the beginning. So if that's the case for you, start measuring your data now. Then for employment, job creation, look at employment records. You can do economic modeling. Again, this is another good example, economic modeling. Many organizations are not going to be able to do economic modeling. So you might, like in ChatGPT, you might say, okay, well, what are some ways to measure these, without, at a low cost, or, without collecting new data, or, something like that. And then for community engagement and participation, you can do attendance records, survey focus groups. Those are some of the things I was sort of talking about with the energy efficiency. Yeah, I mean, sorry, with the electric vehicle activity. Okay, so then we have our last step here, which is justifying conclusions. So then we have these things that we sort of want to think about, which is the standards, which stakeholder values provide the basis for forming the judgment. Oops, sorry. The procedures to examine and summarize the data. What do the findings mean? What claims concerning the program's merit, worth, or significance, and what action should be considered resulting from the evaluation. So you should, after collecting this data and so forth, it would make sense. Now, something I did, I can't really show this in a ChatGPT thing, but and one thing that I did is I was working again on these sort of case studies. In this case, it was on community engagement. And it's a specific subset where these are things with signed community benefit agreements related to energy projects. They're all over the United States. And so what I did is I had the students who were working with me collect quotes from news articles and other places with a given sort of protocol, with a list of all these different things that I was asking for. And then what I did is I copied all that information, the questions and the answers to the question, and I put them into ChatGPT, and I said, identify the lessons learned from this case study. And it gave me an output. Now, did I substantially change the output? Yes. But did it give me a good starting point? Also, yes. So that's one way to improve the efficiency of your analysis, because you know how it is. It's always easier if you start with something as opposed to starting from a blank slate, because you can look at it and say, oh, that's not right. Oh, and then what I did is for these, so we had 16 case studies. I was doing 10 lessons learned. And then after I wrote all the lessons learned, then I went back and I analyzed each one of the lesson learned cases to see linkages among them, right? And I was able to come out with a good collection of about 15 common lessons learned from the cases, and that I could sort of link to them. So like I said, I still have a job because the ChatGPT cannot do that yet. However, it can be like an intern or research assistant, which is good if I'm in my case, like a solo entrepreneur. So the next step is to go ahead and go through all these different steps to make sure that to think about how you're going to disseminate the results and the lessons learned. It's particularly important to go back and to inform your stakeholders. So for example, here, how will the technical and emotional needs of users be supported? And how are you going to prevent the lessons learned from being lost or ignored in the process of making complex or politically sensitive decisions? So you want to think about this step as well as part of your communication activity. Okay, so here's our last section here, which is how to avoid personal bias. Do you want to say something, Hannah? No, okay.
Nope, not at the moment.
Okay. So part of the biggest challenge in program evaluation is personal bias. So, we're all biased. Many of us have unconscious bias of one kind or another. And here's another of these Sydney Harris cartoons says, I believe it's time we stop relying so heavily on instinct, right? And that is, I think, one of the most challenging things to do, because, we all, like I said, we all have biases against one thing or another. We think this is a reason, or we think that's a reason. But you really, like we always talk about having evidence-based decision-making, that doesn't just apply to policymakers, it also applies to all of us. And that's why it's good if program evaluation, policy analysis is a group exercise, because it's a good way to sort of counterbalance that. And think everybody should think about their biases at the beginning of evaluation, and watch themselves throughout, and then talk to others, say, am I being biased, in this case? So this is, looking at different versions of the word good. And I like this this list, because many times I sort of get in trouble, because I can't just say something is good, right? Because good means so many things to different people. So if I say, oh, well, that's a good program, and Dally's going to say, well, what do you mean it's good? Like, how is it good? And so forth. So you need to be, a lot more specific when you're doing, your summary of your analysis. And like I like this one. Rachel is such a good child because, she's well behaved, right? But I don't know if a well-behaved child is always a good child. I mean, I think I like kids to be a bit more lively, in their presentations, right? In how they interact in the world. But like my grandmother, she would probably say, yeah, well-behaved child is a good child. I might say, oh, I think, they should be, like, hey, if they go out and run a lemonade stand and give money to cancer survivors, and hey, I think that's a pretty good one too. So, these are things that I see pretty commonly in program evaluations, where they focus, the program focuses on the good successful client versus the bad unsuccessful client. I'm sure you guys have probably seen this too. The other thing is that, just kind of like with teachers, things like that, right? It's much harder to spend time with the bad student than it is with the good student, right? I know this as a professor, that I had this sort of range of things, but I got to treat them all the same. I keep remembering that. And so you really, want to think about that, because oftentimes I'll see, like, on a web page, something like that, and I only talk about the good things that happen. But you should also, like, have another box. Well, here's some of the things that did not work. That is also important. You want to avoid a case focus that focuses on just a few clients versus all clients. You want to do objective, precise measures versus general things like good and excellent. You want to focus on reality and truth, even when the client might not be happy with your results. This is called truth to power. It's something I have to do relatively often, and it's never quite fun. Identifying your own biases in that evaluation team early. It's good to just talk about this right at the very, very beginning of your study, whatever it is you're doing. And you want to make sure that you provide enough information about the data that somebody could replicate it like 5 years in the future, when you might not be in the job, but they want, maybe you're doing the base case. They want to say that strategic plan is working. They need to know how to replicate your data so it's comparable. Oh, this is my little poem here, which I didn't change from the last thing, just because I still liked it. This is from ChatGPT, who I asked ChatGPT to write a sonnet. In the realm of programs, evaluation dwells a noble quest to measure what is true, with methods, metrics, tales it often tells, unveiling insights to guide what we do. Like Shakespeare's words, a play of light and shade, evaluation weaves its intricate plot. From inputs to impacts, it does cascade, revealing truths that were previously not. Through surveys, interviews, and datagram, the evaluators pen doth truly scribe, unraveling the program's secret strand and bringing forth the knowledge to imbibe. O program evaluation, thy noble art sheds light upon the stage, a priceless part. So if you like this, put in a round of applause for ChatGPT for coming up with this sonnet. Then I'm just in here. This is my webpage. And if you sign up for the newsletter, which comes out monthly, I do a lot of free webinars of one kind or another on other things like benefit cost analysis, things like that. And obviously I do ones for organizations as well. So feel free to sign up for my newsletter. It only comes out once a month, so you can sort of see what's happening and what I'm thinking about. Okay, with that, Hannah, I think we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Let me just stop the recording before we move to the